The Sound and the Fury by Julia Daly and Samantha Julia. In this screencast, we will be talking about time and how it warps Quentin's perception of reality. So this is our first passage, and it's on page 76. When the shadow of the sash appeared on the curtains, it was between 7 and 8 o'clock, and I was in time again, hearing the watch. It was grandfather's, and when father gave it to me, he said, "I give you the mausoleum of all hope and desire. It's rather excruciatingly apt that you will use it to gain the reductio ad absurdum of all human experience, which can fit in your individual needs no better than it fitted his or his father's. I give it to you not that you may remember time, but that you might forget now and then for a moment, and not spend all your breath trying to conquer it. Because no battle is ever won," he said. "They are not even fought. This field only reveals to man his own folly and despair, and victory is an illusion of philosophers and fools." So, this passage is the first one that is in Quentin's chapter, and he talks about his father's view of time, saying that I give you the mausoleum of all hope and desire. So mausoleum is usually something that's related to death. It's a type of grave that an entire family is buried in. So when he talks about the mausoleum of all hope and desire, he's saying that you can only live within your time, and everything that you love and everything that you want will die with you. But later on, he says, "I give it to you not that you may remember time, but that you might forget it now and then for a moment, and not spend all of your breath trying to conquer it." It's interesting because his father is telling him not to spend his entire life obsessing about time and trying to make the most of it every second that he can. And yet, that's exactly what Quentin does. So it shows a sort of disparity between him and his father.
So the second passage we chose was on page 80. I went to the dresser and took up the watch, with the face still down. I tapped the crystal on the corner of the dresser and caught the fragments of glass in my hand and put them into the ashtray and twisted the hands off and put them in the tray. The watch ticked on. I turned the face up, the blank dial with the little wheels clicking and clicking behind it, not knowing any better. Jesus walking on Galilee and Washington not telling lies. Father brought back a watch charm from the St. Louis Fair to Jason, a tiny opera glass into which you squinted with one eye and saw a skyscraper, a Ferris wheel all spidery, Niagara Falls on a pinhead. There was a red smear on the dial. When I saw it, my thumb began to smart. I put the watch down and went into Shreve's room and got the iodine and painted the cut. I cleaned the rest of the glass out of the rim with a towel. This passage provides us an insight on Quentin's deepest thoughts and his overall obsession with time. He repeatedly speaks about the watch, where he says, "I took up the watch ticked on," and he keeps on continuing to talk about the watch in such detailed, descriptive language, where it's a blank dial with little wheels, clicking and clicking. There he's actually using repetition, which he uses twice in here, where he says he puts in the ashtray and he puts them in the tray. So this repetition and his repetitive descriptive language talking about the watch really shows his obsession with it. And here, where he's tapping the crystal on the corner of the dresser, he's really breaking the watch because he thinks if he breaks the watch, he will somehow be free from time. And in this process of trying to become free from time, he sort of becomes captured in time again as he's brought back to a memory that he has in this whole area right here. So his attempts to free himself from time actually show that he ends up more trapped in time. And down here he speaks about his thumb began to smart, which is a detail about him bleeding. He actually broke his skin on his thumb through the glass shards, which really is symbolism and almost foreshadowing on the way that time is going to affect him and the negative impact that it has on him. And then finally, in the end, he has to clean the rest of the glass out of the room with a towel, which is sort of showing the completion of completely destroying time and trying to destroy what overall, as the first passage explained, is his demise and obsession. So the next passage we chose was on page 85. I went out, shutting the door upon the ticking. I looked back into the window. He was watching me across the barrier. There were about a dozen watches in the window, a dozen different hours, and each with the same assertive and contradictory assurance that mine had, without any hands at all, contradicting one another. I could hear mine, ticking away inside my pocket, even though nobody could see it, even though it could tell nothing if anyone could. And so I told myself to take that one, because Father says clocks slay time. He said time is dead as long as it is being clicked off by little wheels. Only when the clock stops does time come to life. The hands were extended, slightly off the horizontal at a faint angle, like a gull tilting into the wind, holding all I used to be sorry about, like the new moon holding water. Niggers say. The jeweler was working again, bent over his bench, the tube tunneled into his face. His hair was parted in the center. The part ran up into the bald spot, like a drained marsh in December. So if I start from the beginning of this passage, Quentin alludes to, again, a lot of time. Upon the ticking is, again, the reminder that obsessively he is constantly thinking about the ticking and time consistently moving, which is an allusion to the time period he's in the antebellum South, where things are sort of moving forward and moving forward. And he's the only one who can really notice the moving forward, but he doesn't accept it. And then if you keep on going, he alludes to a dozen watches in the window and a dozen different hours. Using the repetitive dozen symbolizes how he's caught in different time zones, as some people in his life are pulling him towards the past, towards the old Southern ways, and some of it's pulling him towards the forward, towards progression, towards women's movement. Well, he himself would really much rather just be in the present time. And so being pulled in a dozen different directions is blurring his reality, and he's obsessing over it. And then continuing down, he could hear his ticking away in his pocket, and he could hear his watch even though his watch wasn't ticking, which is symbolic of the fact that it's not the watch itself that is antagonizing him, it's his own inner conscious that's antagonizing him. The watch only symbolizes his inner conscious in the progression. And then down here he alludes to what his father says, that clocks slay time, which is very contradictory as clocks are time, but he's saying that the movement and the progression and his obsession with clocks is sort of slaying his own being. And if you move farther down into this passage towards the end, Quentin or Faulkner utilizes descriptive language to begin to embody the feeling and the sense that Quentin's feeling, like a gull tilting into the wind and like the new moon holding water. The gull tilting into the wind shows how Quentin really feels like he wants to be free, but the new moon holding water is sort of like the gravitational pull and sort of like the helplessness and the pull that all of these other out-of-time feelings and factors sort of pull on him, which really in the end, as he shows how he's obsessing over the details again, where he's describing exactly what the jeweler is doing, sort of exactly shows how obsessive he is with time and how obsessive he is with details to try and escape from the big picture and the fact that in antebellum South there's a progressive movement that a lot of people don't like, and that's why towards the end again he decides to use the derogatory word nigger to sort of like bring himself back into the past, even though throughout this whole passage he's sort of moving towards the future.
So this is the famous trout scene on page 117. The fading vortex drifted away downstream, and then I saw the arrow again, nose into the current, wavering delicately to the motion of the water above which the mayflies slanted and poised. Only you and me then amid the pointing and the horror wall by the clean flame. The trout hung, delicate and motionless among the wavering shadows. 3 boys with fishing poles came onto the bridge, and we leaned on the rail and looked down at the trout. They knew the fish. He was a neighborhood character. They've been trying to catch that trout for 25 years. There's a store in Boston offers a $25 fishing rod to anybody that can catch him. So, in this scene, the trout can represent a lot of things, but for our presentation, we're going to relate it back to the realization that Quentin has. he seems to be the only person who realizes that the antebellum South can no longer happen, and they all have to move forward in time. And he's obsessed with this. He's being pulled in two completely different directions. And we believe that this trout can represent that, because the trout, he talks about the shadow of the trout, never really the fish itself, and that shadow is what haunts him. There is, however, a different interpretation of this passage. If you read the passage through a new historicism lens, and look at this situation from the perspective of the people inside of it, you can find that the people that keep trying to catch the fish also represent the people who are trying to hold on to the past. They don't want to let go of their slavery, and they don't want to move on to a place where people can be equal. So no matter, they don't even care about the reward that much, they just want to hold on to the past as much as they can.
So, in summary, if you think of the concepts of time and Quentin, you find a lot of very important points that are made through these. The first one is that it haunts him, which is quite obvious from his repetitive and obsessive references to time. You also find that he's caught with new versus old. And finally, you quite see that it might be his hubris, his obsession over time, as it will eventually, as it foreshadows in these passages, lead to his demise. So overall, even though Quentin's obsession with time may seem like a good thing at times, because he acknowledges that he's living in the past and the present, it's more of a damaging thing to him, because he's the only one who acknowledges that, and it sort of ostracizes him amongst society, because nobody else wants to move forward when he knows that it has to happen.